When I look back at everything that happened, I still can't decide exactly when the first cracks began to form, or when I should have realized that the life I thought I was building with Mia wasn't really the same life she was living beside me. My name is Eric Nolan, and for a long time I believed I understood what loyalty looked like. I believed that when you love someone, when you invest years of your life, when you plan for a future that feels concrete and real, the person on the other side of that bond is holding tightly to the same vision. But the truth is that some people are capable of living double lives with terrifying ease, and sometimes you don't discover that until someone completely outside your world reaches out and shatters every illusion you were clinging to. Mia and I started dating 3 years ago. She was the kind of woman who made everyone in the room turn their head without even trying. Beautiful, calm, soft-spoken, the type of person who made you feel like you were the only one she really saw. I fell in love with her fast, too fast maybe. But when you're in your late 20s and you're finally with someone who makes you believe that commitment can actually feel natural and exciting instead of suffocating, you don't question it. You just hold on. We moved in together after a year. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, at least that's what I told myself. It just felt right. She said she loved waking up next to me, loved the stability, loved the way we were building something steady in a world where most people our age were still drifting. I believed her. I believed everything she said back then. Maybe that's what hurts the most. I didn't see the signs. I didn't question her late nights at work, the sudden weekend team meetings, the moments when she seemed distant even though she insisted everything was fine. I blamed stress. I blamed her job. I blamed anything but the possibility that she was giving her heart or her body to someone else. There was no reason to suspect it. We rarely fought. We made plans for vacations and future houses and maybe kids one day. She bought me thoughtful gifts, surprised me with dinner after long shifts, left notes on the fridge reminding me she loved me. It wasn't the behavior of a woman ready to blow up her relationship. Or maybe it was, and I just didn't want to see it. Everything started to unravel on a Wednesday afternoon, one of those days when nothing feels unusual until suddenly everything changes. I was at home answering emails when my phone vibrated with a number I didn't recognize. Normally I would have ignored it, but something made me pick up. Maybe instinct, maybe fate, maybe the universe trying to warn me that my world was about to be torn open. A woman's voice came through the line, steady at first, then trembling. She said her name was Lauren. She apologized before saying anything else, which immediately made my stomach twist, because nobody opens a call to a stranger with an apology unless something very, very bad is coming. She asked if I was Eric, if I was Mia's boyfriend. The moment she said Mia's name, something inside me froze. There was a small silence, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath, and then she told me she was married. Married to a man named Daniel. A man I had never heard about in my life. She told me that she had found messages, pictures, proof that Daniel had been cheating on her for over 6 months. And then she said the words that made my ears ring like I'd just been hit in the head. The woman her husband had been seeing was named Mia, my girlfriend, my partner, my supposed future. I don't remember exactly what I did in the seconds after she said it. Everything felt like it was spinning, like my brain was trying to reject the information as if it were some kind of glitch in reality. I asked her if she was sure, and she said she wasn't the kind of woman who made accusations without evidence. She had screenshots. She had timelines. She had enough details to remove any doubt. She wasn't calling to fight with me, she said. She wasn't calling to blame me. She was calling because she didn't know what else to do, and because she thought I deserved to know the truth before Mia came home and pretended everything was normal. The worst part was how calm she sounded, like she had passed the point of screaming and crying and had reached that numb, exhausted place where pain turns quiet. I thanked her, though I don't know why or how, and she told me she'd send everything to my phone so I could see it for myself. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. A minute later the screenshots came in. I wish I could say I was shocked by what I saw, but shock doesn't feel like the right word. It felt more like being detached from my own body, like I was watching someone else's life collapse. Messages between Mia and a man saved in her phone under a fake name. Photos of her in outfits I'd never seen, in rooms I didn't recognize. Plans for hotel meetups on nights she told me she was working late. Compliments, pet names, confessions that she missed him, that she needed him. And the timestamps. The timestamps lined up perfectly with the nights she came home tired but showered and strangely quiet. I sat there staring at my screen while my entire relationship rewrote itself in my mind. Every moment I thought was real suddenly felt like a lie. Every smile, Every kiss, every promise weighed down by the knowledge that she had been giving pieces of herself to someone else. And not just someone else. A married man. Someone with a wife who had done nothing wrong. Someone who now had to deal with her own world falling apart because of the woman I trusted more than anyone. I don't know how long I sat frozen before something inside me finally snapped and I realized I had to confront her. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know how to process anything. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Nothing in my life would ever be the same after this moment. And Mia. She had no idea that the truth was already waiting for her. The hours between receiving those screenshots and hearing Mia's key in the door were some of the longest of my life. A quiet torture where every minute felt like I was suspended between who I used to be and who I was about to become. I kept replaying everything in my head. Moments that once seemed innocent now shaped themselves into something darker. The nights she claimed she needed space to decompress after work, the sudden anxiety when her phone buzzed, the way she once snapped at me for checking the weather on her screen because she thought I was snooping. Back then I brushed it off as stress. Now it all made too much sense. When she finally came home that night, I could tell immediately she hadn't sensed anything was wrong. She walked in humming softly, the way she did when she left work on good terms, placing her purse on the hook and stretching like she always did. She looked comfortable, familiar, safe, and yet I couldn't see her the same way anymore. It was like watching a stranger move around my home wearing my girlfriend's skin. I thought confronting her would be something explosive, something cinematic, something filled with yelling or tears, but what surprised me most was how calm everything felt. It was a numb calm, like my emotions had shut down as a self-defense mechanism. I told her we needed to talk. She paused, looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes just for a second. Maybe fear. Maybe guilt. Maybe recognition that the moment she had been dreading had finally arrived. She sat down across from me, but she looked smaller somehow, like the gravity of the moment shrank her confidence. When I told her that a woman had called me, she didn't even pretend to be confused. Her shoulders tensed, her face blanched, and I realized that she wasn't shocked. I knew she was shocked she got caught by someone other than me. She whispered one word asking the woman's name, and the way she reacted when I said Lauren told me everything I needed to know. She already knew the consequences that were coming. From that point forward, the truth spilled out of her. Not in a dramatic confession, not in a desperate plea for forgiveness, but in fragmented, shame-coated explanations that did nothing to heal what she had done. She told me she met Daniel at a company seminar. He was older, confident, charming in a polished, rehearsed kind of way. She insisted she didn't know he was married at first, as if that somehow softened the betrayal. But even after she found out, she didn't stop. She told herself it was just physical, that it was harmless, that I didn't need to know because it didn't change how she felt about me. She said it was a mistake she didn't know how to end, that she felt trapped, that she feared hurting me. I listened, but everything she said passed through me like static. None of her excuses mattered. None of them made the nights I waited up for her any less humiliating. None made the lies feel less intentional. None erased the image of Lauren's quiet heartbreak or the screenshots still burned into my memory. At some point Mia started crying, the kind of quiet, shaking cry that once would have broken me. But I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt too much and it manifested as nothing. I told her I couldn't stay. The words came out steady, even though my heart felt like it was shattering each time I forced them out. She begged me not to make any decisions right away, but I already had. I told her I needed space, and that meant she needed to leave for the night. She hesitated, begged again, said she didn't want to lose what we had. But I couldn't look at her anymore. Not after the things she'd done. Not after knowing she'd betrayed not only me but another woman who trusted her husband the same way I trusted her. She eventually gathered a few things and left. The moment the door closed behind her, the silence in the apartment felt suffocating. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what normal looked like anymore. All I knew was that the life I had spent 3 years building had collapsed in a single evening. I paced around the living room for almost an hour before finally sitting down and opening my phone again. There was a message from Lauren waiting for me. She said she didn't want to intrude, but she hoped I was okay. She apologized again, even though she wasn't the one who had done anything wrong. I responded and thanked her for being honest. Then she asked if Mia had confirmed everything. I told her yes. She told me she was filing for divorce. She said that she had confronted Daniel, and he denied everything until she showed him the screenshots. She said he tried to minimize it, tried to act like it was a meaningless mistake, but she wasn't going to let him talk his way out of it. She was tired of lies. She was tired of feeling like she wasn't enough. As she typed, I felt something unexpected sympathy, but also a strange sense of connection. We were two strangers whose lives had been blindsided by the same storm. Two people trying to stitch together the pieces of their worlds after being blindsided by people who swore they loved us. We talked longer than I expected, not about revenge or anger, but about reality, about how betrayal changes the way you see yourself, about how you start to question your own worth, about how it feels to realize the person closest to you may have never been who you thought they were. I didn't tell her how empty I felt. I didn't tell her how part of me blamed myself, even though I knew logically that it wasn't my fault. I didn't tell her how terrified I was that I might never trust anyone again. But she seemed to understand anyway. Eventually, we said goodnight, and I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mia's face, the guilt in her expression, the apologies that felt too shallow to mean anything. I also saw Lauren crying alone somewhere, processing a different version of the same pain. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but I knew the collapse wasn't over. What I didn't expect was how much darker things were going to get before the truth finally came out, and how deeply both our lives were about to intertwine in ways I never could have anticipated. The morning after everything came out, I woke to a heaviness in my chest that felt almost physical, like grief had wrapped itself around my ribs and refused to loosen its grip. The bed felt too big without Mia beside me, but her absence didn't feel like a loss so much as a correction of reality. It was the first morning in 3 years where I wasn't waking up next to a lie. I moved quietly around the apartment, as if making too much noise would somehow force me to feel things I wasn't ready to feel. Every object seemed different now, every memory tainted. The coffee mug she always used, the blanket she always wrapped around herself, the plant she insisted we adopt, which she named, which I watered more often than she did. Everything looked the same but felt poison, as if the betrayal had seeped into the walls overnight. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. There's no handbook for discovering the person you love has been cheating with a married man. There's no checklist that tells you how to move forward. I just knew I needed space, not only from her but from the life I built with her. So I left the apartment and drove aimlessly, letting the passing streets distract me from the thoughts that kept forcing themselves into my mind. Eventually, I parked at a small overlook outside the city where the view stretched out for miles. The quiet was calming, or at least quieter than the storm inside me. While I sat there, my phone buzzed again. For a split second I thought it might be Mia, but when I saw Lauren's name, something in me settled rather than tightened. She said she hoped I managed to sleep. I told her I didn't. She responded that she hadn't either. She said Daniel had spent half the night trying to convince her he could fix everything, that it was meaningless, that she was overreacting. But then she said something that made me pause. He claimed Mia had chased him first, that she made him feel needed, that he got caught up in something he didn't know how to stop. It made me sick to read it, not because I believed him, but because I recognized the tone. It was the same tone Mia used when explaining everything to me. The same tone people use when they want to rewrite their wrongdoing into an accident instead of a choice. But as I kept reading, I realized Lauren wasn't saying it to excuse him. She was saying it because she found it insulting. She said she couldn't stand how both of them, her husband and the woman he cheated with, were trying to make their betrayal sound like a slippery slope instead of a deliberate climb. I told her I understood, more than she realized. Our conversation drifted again into something strangely comforting, an exchange between two people who were still strangers but connected by a very specific kind of pain. At some point she asked if Mia was still at the apartment. I told her I'd asked Mia to leave and that I didn't know where she'd gone. I expected judgment, but instead she said she admired my strength. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, but reading her message helped more than I cared to admit. Later that afternoon, Mia started calling, over and over. I let every call go to voicemail. She texted long apologetic paragraphs, then short frantic ones, then messages that sounded like she was trying to convince herself that what she'd done wasn't as bad as it was. I couldn't bring myself to respond. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not with her still trying to spin the narrative in ways that made her feel less guilty. I thought ignoring her would give both of us space. I was wrong. That evening, while I was still out trying to avoid going home, I got another message from Lauren, this time not a long one, not a thoughtful one, just 4 words that made my blood run cold. You should be careful. I asked her what she meant. She said that Daniel had stormed out after she told him she was filing for divorce. He said something about talking to Mia and setting things straight. She told me she didn't trust what he might do, especially because he was terrified of their affair becoming public. The fear in her message was palpable, but not for herself, for me. She said if Daniel decided to confront Mia, there was no telling how far he'd go to protect himself. I thanked her and told her I'd let her know if anything happened. But I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't afraid of Daniel physically, but I was afraid of what two guilty people might do when they were cornered. When I finally went home, the apartment was dark and quiet. I walked inside slowly, half expecting Mia to be there waiting for me even though I told her not to come. There was no sign of her, which gave me a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. About an hour later, there was a knock, loud, abrupt, demanding. Not the kind of knock someone uses when they're unsure of how they'll be received. My stomach dropped. I checked the peephole. Mia. Her face looked frantic, eyes red, makeup smudged. I opened the door halfway, keeping my body blocking the rest. She tried to push her way in, but I didn't move. She started talking fast, her words slurring together in panic. She said Daniel had shown up at her friend's place screaming, accusing her, demanding answers about how everything came out. She said he blamed her for ruining his life, that he was terrified his coworkers would find out he slept with someone from a competing company, terrified his wife would actually leave him, terrified of the financial fallout of a divorce. She said he even implied he'd make sure she paid for this if she didn't find a way to fix it. I wanted to ask her what she thought fixing it meant, but she was spiraling, crying, grabbing my arm. She begged me to let her in, saying she didn't feel safe, saying Daniel might be following her, saying she had nowhere else to go. And somewhere beneath the anger and betrayal and disappointment, a small instinctive part of me still wanted to protect her. But before I could decide what to do, another knock sounded. But this one wasn't frantic. It was heavy, deliberate, spaced out. A completely different kind of knock. My entire body went tense. I looked at Mia. She went pale. For a second neither of us moved. The hallway outside was silent, but whoever stood on the other side of my door hadn't left. They were waiting. It was only then that I realized the situation was spinning far beyond just heartbreak. Betrayal had consequences, and one of those consequences was now standing right outside my apartment, waiting to confront one or both of us. And in that chilling moment, with Mia trembling beside me and the echo of that knock still vibrating through the air, I knew the story wasn't simply about cheating anymore. Something bigger was unveiling itself, something neither of us had prepared for. The second knock echoed through the apartment like a warning, the kind that makes your instincts flare even before your mind has time to process what's happening. I felt Mia behind me, shaking so badly I could hear the faint rustle of her clothes. Every part of me wanted to pretend it was someone harmless, a neighbor or a delivery person, anyone except the man who had detonated his own marriage and my relationship in one reckless, selfish spiral. But deep down, we both knew exactly who it was. I stepped forward slowly, careful not to make any sound, and checked the peephole again. This time I saw the top of someone's head, shoulders tense, body angled forward like they were bracing for confrontation. I couldn't see his face, but something about the way he stood there told me it was Daniel. When he knocked a third time, the sound was sharp, impatient, and the hairs on my arms rose. I didn't know whether opening the door would escalate things or defuse them. I didn't know if staying silent would make him angrier. I just knew he wasn't leaving until he got whatever he came for. I turned toward Mia. She looked terrified, but there was something else in her expression too: guilt, desperation, and maybe the realization that the consequences she'd been avoiding were finally catching up to her. She whispered for me not to open the door. But I couldn't just stand there and wait for whatever was about to happen, so I took a breath, braced myself, and unlatched the lock. The moment the door cracked open, Daniel's face appeared, and he pushed the door wider without waiting for permission. I stood my ground, blocking him with my arm. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from being used to getting his way. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped near his temple. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to reclaim control over Mia, over his wife's decision, over the chaos he created. He started talking at me, not to me, spitting accusations like he'd rehearsed them in the car. He said Mia had ruined his marriage, that she'd told him she'd keep everything private, that she implied she'd never expose him. Then he turned to her, pointing a finger with a fury that made my stomach twist. He told her she owed him loyalty, that she promised she wouldn't let things spiral, that she never should have let her little boyfriend find out. I had never felt anger like the one that unfurled inside me when he called me that. Not because of the insult, but because of the entitlement dripping from every word he spoke. As if Mia was something he owned, as if Lauren was nothing but collateral damage. As if I was an annoying speed bump in the path of his own selfishness. I told him to calm down. He didn't. Instead he shoved his way further inside, forcing me backward. And suddenly he was only a few feet from Mia. She flinched when he looked at her. Like she wasn't just afraid of him but of what he was capable of saying. I wanted to tell him to leave, to threaten to call the police, to do anything that would establish boundaries. But before I could say anything, he said something that changed everything. He claimed he wasn't at my door to fight. He said he there because Lauren had told him she spoke to me, that she'd given me the screenshots, and that meant Mia, or I had to have told Lauren something first. He insisted someone here leaked the truth, purposely sabotaged him, purposely ruined his marriage. He said I needed to fix it. He said Mia needed to fix it, like the two of us were responsible for the fallout of his own cheating. When I asked what he meant by fix it, he said something chilling. He said if either of us made this go public, he'd lose his job, his reputation, everything. And he said he wasn't afraid to destroy a few lives to protect his own. The threat was unmistakable. Mia broke at that moment. Not emotionally, but in the way someone breaks when a truth they've been hiding finally forces itself into the open. She told him to stop, told him he couldn't intimidate us, told him he wasn't going to bully his way out of the mess he made. But her voice cracked, and I could see his control over her still held weight. He lunged toward her, not to hit her but to grab her arm in a way that made her wince. That was the moment I snapped. I stepped between them and shoved him back. It wasn't hard, but it was enough to make a point. Enough to make him stumble and realize he didn't get to come into my home and manhandle people. He glared at me with a fury that bordered on unhinged, but with that one push, something shifted in the room. The power dynamic changed. He wasn't the one in control anymore, and he knew it. He stared at me like he was trying to decide whether he could intimidate me the way he intimidated Mia. But he couldn't. I wasn't afraid of him not anymore. When he realized screaming and threatening wasn't working, he switched tactics. He started blaming Mia, saying she misled him, saying she told him she'd keep their affair secret, saying she wanted things he never promised her. It was shocking how quickly he rewrote the narrative to paint himself as the victim. And Mia, overwhelmed and shaking, didn't even argue. She just kept whispering that she was sorry. Sorry to me, sorry to the situation, sorry for everything spiraling out of control. But the turning point came when he said something so manipulative, so calculated, that even Mia froze. He said unless we all got our stories straight, he'd make sure to tell everyone including Lauren that Mia had been the one pursuing him, pressuring him, even threatening him if he didn't stay involved. It was such a sick, strategic lie that even Mia's face went blank with disbelief. I told him to leave. He refused. So I stepped closer, not aggressively, not violently, just close enough that he understood the conversation was over. And maybe it was that he realized he couldn't intimidate me, or maybe he finally saw how desperate he looked, but something in him cracked. He backed out of the apartment slowly, muttering under his breath, shaking his head like he was the victim in all this. The moment the door closed, Mia slid to the floor in tears. She kept saying she never meant for any of this to happen, but her words barely registered. My mind was spinning. Daniel was spiraling. Lauren was divorcing him. Mia had betrayed both of us. And now this man was desperate, cornered, afraid of losing his reputation, and willing to rewrite history to protect himself. The situation wasn't just messy anymore, it was dangerous. And something in my gut told me he wasn't done. Not even close. And I was right. Because the next morning, everything escalated in a way none of us could have predicted. A way that would drag all four of our lives into a place far darker than a cheating scandal. A truth was about to surface, one that would change everything I thought I knew about what Mia had really been hiding. The morning after Daniel showed up at my apartment didn't feel real. I woke with the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones instead of your muscles, the kind that follows nights filled with too many thoughts and never enough clarity. The apartment was quiet but not peaceful. It felt like the silence you get after an argument that never really ended, where every object in the room feels like it's waiting for the next explosion. Mia was still asleep on the couch. She hadn't stopped crying last night until sometime around dawn, and by then both of us were too drained to continue the conversation. She looked small curled up under the blanket, but not in a way that made me want to comfort her. It was the smallness of consequence, of someone realizing too late that their choices had finally caught up to them. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring aimlessly at the steam rising from my mug. trying not to think about everything that had happened. But the more I tried to push it out of my mind, the more pieces kept circling back, clicking together in ways they hadn't before. Something Mia said last night nagged at me. She had been terrified Daniel would tell his version to Lauren. But why would she be so afraid of that if she knew he was lying? Why did she look like she expected some part of his lie to sound believable? The question lingered like a splinter I couldn't pull out. When Mia finally woke up, she looked at me cautiously, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak. She whispered my name, but I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, searching her face for something I couldn't quite name. Her guilt was obvious, but guilt wasn't the same thing as honesty. I asked her to tell me everything she hadn't said the night before, everything she had kept buried. She said she already had, but she said it with eyes that wouldn't meet mine. And that was when the truth began untangling itself, one thread at a time. I asked her again how long the affair had been going on. She repeated the same answer, a few months, but something in my gut twisted at that. Last night, when Daniel was panicking, he mentioned that Mia had promised to keep things private. He said it with the familiarity of someone who had been reassured many times before, someone who wasn't new to the dynamic, someone who had grown comfortable in it. I pressed her, not letting her shift or dodge. And finally she broke. She admitted it hadn't been a few months. It had been a year. A full year of lies layered on top of lies. A full year of coming home to me and pretending she loved me while secretly giving parts of herself to someone else. A full year of choosing deceit over honesty every single day. I felt the air leave my body as she said it, but she wasn't done. She said it started long before she knew he was married. But once she found out, she didn't stop. In fact, she said knowing made it worse. She said the secrecy became intoxicating. She said the attention made her feel powerful, seen, wanted. She said things I couldn't believe she was admitting, things that made my stomach sink because they revealed a version of her I never knew existed. And then she said the thing that shattered everything beyond repair. She said she had been the one who contacted Daniel first. She had been the one pursuing him. She had been the one who insisted they keep things quiet. She had been the one who asked him to meet outside of work, and when he tried to end things months ago, she had convinced him not to. She said she told him I'd never find out. She said she told him Lauren would never suspect anything. She had been the one holding the door open to the affair the entire time, even when he wavered, even when he tried to stop. I sat completely still, absorbing every word as if my body couldn't risk moving or else it would collapse under the weight of what she was telling me. All this time, I had been picturing Daniel as the older, manipulative villain and Mia as someone caught in something she didn't know how to escape. But the truth was far messier, far darker. She wasn't simply a victim of poor judgment. She had been an active participant. She had nurtured the lie. She had protected it. She had grown it. And then, when it began falling apart, she had tried to hide it behind half-truths and carefully controlled confessions. I asked her why she didn't end things earlier, and she said something that made me feel sick. She said she felt like she had two lives and she didn't want to give up either. She said she liked the attention Daniel gave her but still wanted the stability I provided. She said it felt easier to juggle both than to confront the emptiness she felt inside herself. I realized then that the betrayal was never just about cheating. It was about who she had chosen to become. Or maybe who she had always been beneath the image she showed me. I told her she needed to leave the apartment. She begged to stay. She begged for one more chance. She begged for forgiveness she hadn't earned. But there was no part of me left that could believe anything she said. I told her she needed to go and that if Daniel tried to contact her again, she needed to block him and deal with her own fallout. She cried, clinging to me, apologizing through sobs. But I didn't move. I didn't soften. I didn't bend. Eventually she gathered her things and walked out the door, leaving behind the last remnants of a relationship that had died long before I knew it. After she left, I sat alone in the apartment, feeling the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you. Feel it like a heartbeat in your mind, pulsing with reminders of everything that's been lost. I didn't know what to do next until my phone buzzed again. It was Lauren. She asked if I was safe. I told her what happened. Not all the details, but enough that she understood Daniel had shown up. And then came a message that lifted something heavy off my chest. She said she was proud of me for walking away. She said she had finalized the paperwork for the divorce filing that morning. She said she was choosing a new life, even if it terrified her. We talked for a long time, Not romantically, not emotionally. Just to people who had survived the same storm and finally found themselves standing on the other side of it. People who weren't broken, just healing. I wasn't happy, not yet. She wasn't either, but we were moving forward. Separately, but in parallel, and sometimes that's enough. The affair was over, the truth was out, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Betrayal didn't define me. It didn't define her, it didn't define us. It was just one story in our lives, painful, messy, unforgettable, but finally, mercifully, over.